What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero back with another retro Yu-Gi-Oh video. And in this video, we're going to be covering yet another breaker format deck, and this one is quite unique. It was actually come up with by the Discord user Colgate, who is in the YGO from Zero Discord server. Link in the description down below. It's a great place to find games in any of the formats that I've featured on the channel thus far. And this is actually very interesting. It's Amazon's Burn. And basically, I adapted their list almost entirely. I made a very minor change in the main deck. Basically, they had Solemn in the main deck. I swapped it out for a Painful Choice, which I do think is pretty good in this format at setting up whatever plays you need to set up. And also, I sort of overhauled the side deck a little bit. But I think the deck, like as it was, I think it was actually pretty exciting and pretty good. So I kept the main deck as it was. There are some things that are quite different from a regular breaker format deck, and we'll talk about them in the deck breakdown. But I do think this is a very exciting sort of way to adapt Amazonas to playability, because Amazonas is an archetype that is not quite as good in this format. And it's something that, it's never the best archetype throughout the years, but it is a pretty popular one. It was used by Mai in the anime. And also, it's just kind of cool as being one of the OG archetypes. So, people are always going to try and break it. And I think that this version of the deck is probably the best you can do as of now. Because right now, most of the Amazon's cards, they just sort of buff each other up. Like, you've got Paladin, which buffs itself. You got Tiger, which buffs itself as well, but also, acts as an attack sync. Those are probably the best of the other Amazoness monsters that we're not really playing here. But Colgate sort of focused on the Amazoness Swordwoman effect that says your opponent takes any battle damage you would have taken from battles involving this card instead. And that can be a very powerful effect and make Amazoness Swordwoman a very annoying monster for your opponent to deal with, as it can deal some damage, and then if your opponent wants to clear it through battle, they've got to actually take damage to do so. So, very neat card. Another Amazoness card lends itself well to Burn is Amazoness Archer. Is a 1400 attack point monster that's kind of like Cannon Soldier, but it technically does more damage per monster. It says you contribute 2 monsters, inflict 1200 damage to your opponent. So it's dealing 600 damage per monster as opposed to 500. Unfortunately, the 2 monster sort of restriction is a bit more tough to fulfill. But using this card, you can sort of deal that last bit of damage that you need to deal in this sort of burn deck. So I do think it's very good in that way. And the other cards here are just sort of to facilitate this combo. Or not necessarily combo, but these monsters. So we get Triple Giant Rat to fetch out any of these monsters here. Also fetches out Exiled Force and Injection Fairy Lily, both of which are very, very good Earth monsters. Exiled Force can also be searched off of the double reinforcing the army that we've got here, which also searches out the Amazoness Swordswoman and the Amazoness Archer and helps deck then a little bit. We got triple Lava Golem here, and this is like the main combo of the deck, really. If you bring out a Lava Golem on your opponent's side of the field and then attack into it with Amazoness Swordswoman, that's 1500 damage. That's pretty good, and also Lava Golem itself burns your opponent for 1000 every turn, so that's pretty nice as well. It also acts as a great removal in this format too. We also got a Scientist, very, very powerful card in this format, so it makes sense that we're playing it here. We got Sangan and Witch to search out pretty much anything that we need in the deck. The only thing that these can't search is Lava Golem, but, we've got enough deck thinning that hopefully we can draw into these, just naturally. For the spells, we got Change of Heart, Darkhold, Graceful Charity, Mirage of Nightmare, Monster Reborn, triple MST to go with the Mirage, Painful Choice, Pot of Greed, Raigeki, double Reinforce the Army, as I mentioned before, triple Scapegoat, and a Snatch. Now, the Scapegoats are here because it does pair well with Lava Golem, as your opponent can't attack you directly if you've got Scapegoat tokens on the field. However, it also does match up decently into things like Scientist. Like, if they're going for a big damage push, Scientists can bring out a bunch of fusions to clear your monsters that are already on field, but they can't really help against Scapegoat as much. Essentially only negates normal traps, and nothing negates quick play spells in terms of the fusions that Scientists can bring out. So Scapegoats can be pretty good in this deck. For the traps, we've got Call the Haunted Ceasefire, Imperial Order, Magic Cylinder, Mirror Force, and Ring of Destruction, which is a pretty good suite of traps. The only 2 that are kind of different from a regular standard build are Magic Cylinder and Ceasefire, both of which go very well with this burn strategy. Although you could argue that Magic Cylinder isn't really worth playing here, as your opponent has to kind of play into it a bit, and there are many, many ways to turn this off. So, there are some potential changes that you can make to this deck, but I think this is a pretty good starting point to the deck. And of course, if you wanted to copy Colgate's initial list exactly, you could just replace the Painful for a Solemn. I took out the Solemn because I felt like, unlike with other burn decks, there aren't really as many things that you necessarily want to protect at all costs in this deck. So I felt like Solemn was paying a bit too much for its effect. when this deck doesn't really mind like losing certain pieces of its board. But I do think the Solemn is a very powerful card just individually, so you could definitely include it if you want to. For the side deck, we've got a pretty standard suite of things to, sort of defend against a variety of different decks. We got triple Wang Hu for Scientist decks. Decks like that often get shut down by Wang Hu because all the monsters they want to bring out are, 1400 attack or less. We got a Breaker and triple Royal Decree to deal with more back row heavy decks. A Harpy's Featherduster and Heavy Storm for that as well. We've got Confiscation, Delinquent Duo, and Forceful Sentry here in the side. In case we're going first, we can potentially side these in if we want them. We got Double Knock for the Flip Focus deck, and of course the Solemn Judgment if you do want to play around with the initial main deck plan. The Fusion deck, at this time in the game's history, it was unlimited, so basically the way we played this format is like through proxies. So if you do need a specific fusion monster, you can just tell your opponent, hey, I'm bringing out this fusion monster, and as long as you haven't gone through 3 copies of it already, that should be fine. But we've just got sort of a who's who of the toolbox here. So we've got Dark Bolt of the Terrible, Dark Fire Dragon, Dragoness of the Wicked Knight, Empress Judge, Roaring Ocean Snake, and Punished Eagle, just to represent the Scientist FTK here. Fiend Skull Dragon, Reaper on the Nightmare, Ryu Senshi, Super Robo Lady, and Super Robo Yaru rarely come up, but they can be important. Lost Warrior from Another Planet, Thousand Eyes Restrict, and then the last 2 fusion monsters here are kind of just wild cards, Twin-Headed Thunder Dragon and Black Skull Dragon. But that's going to do it for the deck breakdown. I don't think this deck is perfect by any means necessarily. I think that it's more optimized than many of the other builds that I've shown off on this channel, because Colgate has taken some time and really tested this out and sort of optimized the deck pretty well. But there's always room for improvement, and I'm excited to see what people do with this if they do adopt in the future. But for now, let's dive into the games and see how this does in my hands. Okay, we've got a game against Soul65, who's a frequent guest on the channel. Always a pleasure to have them on. We are playing the Amazoness Burn deck, and let's see if we can make something happen here. We are going to be going first here, which is pretty good for this deck. It can set up Disruption to, like, the Scientist deck if Soul is on that. And it's also good because we've got Mirage of Nightmare in the opener, so that's very, very nice. We're just going to set a Giant Rat, fire Mirage, and then just set all the spell traps in our hand, pass back to our opponent. This should be pretty good for us. They're going to think on this, and unfortunately they do have the MST, so that's a bit unfortunate. But, that's always a risk when you play Mirage. We still got a pretty good board here. They're going to bring out Scientist, which is kind of rough. And now they're going to pay 1,000 to bring out a monster here, which is kind of rough. They can bring out Balter, hit over our set, which is annoying. They're going to bring out Sentry here. That does shut off our disruption, but luckily for us, the only disruption we have that's shut off by that is Ceasefire, so we don't really care the most about Sentry here. It's just another 1,000 damage down. But our opponent's also going to bring out a Dark Balter here, and that will be able to clear our Rat, which is quite unfortunate. But they're going to hit Balter in there, so Rat will go. We won't take any, sort of damage from that attack, but we will take damage from the Scientist attack there. Opponent's going to set 2, send those fusions back to deck, and pass back to us. We draw Lava Golem, which could be nice for later. We're just going to bring out Exiled Force, not use priority on this, and attack into Scientist. That will indeed go through, so we feel fine about that. We're going to pass back to our opponent here. They're going to bring out Egghead Cannon, so it looks like they're on a bit of the XYZ fusion deck that I showed off in my last breaker video. But they might be taking some different liberties with it. So that will attack over Exiled. We'll take 800 from that. We do draw a Reborn, so we could potentially bring back Exiled and pop the Egghead Cannon. But I think the better move here is actually to bring back the Scientist and then get over Exiled that way. So they've got an IO. We've got an MST, though, so we will be able to bring out the Scientist here. We're not going to use Prio because if they've got TT here, then that would be really bad for us. But, we are going to pay the 1,000 after that window is passed to bring out Ryu Senshi here. This will shut off their traps, and that's all we really care about here since Exit Cannon doesn't really have an effect to negate. We're going to hit over that and then hit indirectly for 300. Then we're going to end our turn. Ryu Senshi will go back to deck, and they will get an opportunity to do something here. They are going to fire Change of Heart, which is kind of rough for us. They'll take the Scientist and bring out some fusions, which is kind of rough. Essentially, will shut off our traps, which is unfortunate. But luckily, they can't really do much damage to us here in terms of just, the fusion that they're bringing out. Unfortunately, they're going to go for more fusions here, which means they might have something like the Catapult Turtle OTK lined up here, and that'd be a bit unfortunate. They're going to go for meta here and bring out a level 6 in the form of a Roaring Ocean Sea Snake, and then go for a Last Will here. So that will indeed bring out the Turtle, and with Senshi online, we could fire a Ceasefire here, but that'll just convert to 1,000 damage off the Senshi. So this will indeed be lethal. He has 300, 2400, 3400. So that leaves us with 2500 left. Cal Patrol's 5, 1,000, 1,500, 1,650, and then 1,050 more, so 2,700, so just barely over the amount that they need. And I actually miscalculate this initially. I'm like, oh, we're still fine, right? But we are in fact not fine. And we wouldn't be fine here either way because they could just bring out another monster with Magical Scientist. Again, Ceasefire just trades for the Reach Sentry 1,000, so it wouldn't actually do anything here. So that will indeed be the end of the game. So, that occasionally that happens that way. The Scientist sort of OTK is very, very strong. It's something you always have to watch out for. So it seems like they've incorporated this into the XYZ Fusion deck. So something to keep in mind for games 2 and 3. For game 2, I believe I side in the hand rips. I think I side out some of the scapegoats, and I also side out a Magic Cylinder because, again, Scientist, Magic Cylinder is really not good because if they're bringing out Sentry every time, then, Magic Cylinder is basically useless. But that will be the end of game 1. We're going to dive into game 2 here. Hopefully we can do a little bit better here. They did not actually see any of the burn tools that we had. So, they might not have sided against us appropriately. So that's pretty nice at least. And this is a pretty good opener. We're going to fire a Painful here, send the Forceful, Comfy, Duo, and then double Rhoda. This might have been a weird Painful. Maybe I should have also fired Graceful first before firing the Painful. But I fired the Painful first because I wanted to deck them a little bit. And I figured going for the hand rips now could be good just to get them out of the deck and also potentially get our opponent to give them to us. I think maybe the double Rhoda was a bit weird. So I sent the Rhodas because this gave us more options for tutoring out something from deck that we might need. So I felt like it was an all-around good utility card. Maybe I should have said some more powerful cards instead. Just to give our opponent a bit more of a painful choice. Especially given that we've got the Graceful here, so I don't know. It's a bit weird. But they are going to give us the Reinforce in the Army, which I think is the right choice on their part. We're going to fire a Graceful here, and that's pretty good. We're going to send a Lava Golem and an Amazon's Archer. This does reveal to our opponent what we're on. But I feel like given the hand we've got, that was very well worth it. We're going to set a Sangan, Mirror Force, Change of Heart, Ring of Destruction, and Mirage, and then pass back to our opponent. Now, maybe we should have sent the Rhoda instead of one of the other ones that we had here. But we figure if the Mirage goes off, something that our opponent might want to do is hand rip us. And also, if we don't draw MST for the Mirage, then that would be pretty bad if we discard one of our power spells or traps. So I chose just to set the powerful ones and keep the Rhoda in hand. I'm just going to think here, and they do have an MST again for our Mirage. I guess we'll never manage to pull off Mirage here. But our opponent's going to go for a Pot of Greed, draw 2, bring out a Wang Hu here, which is ultimately fine against this sort of deck. It does shut off some of our plays, but we do have Ring for it and also Mirror Force. We might have potentially wanted to Ring there. But I want to do is I want to, use the Mirror Force profitably and then save the Ring for like a Scientist play. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. But Lava Golem is very nice. We'll just set the Witch here. If they commit another monster board, we can Lava Golem over it. Unfortunately, they have Knock for our Witch, which is very, very rough for us. They're going to attack in for 17. We'll take that. And then they're just going to pass back to us. We draw Amazon's Swordswoman, and we do a bit of a weird play here. We summon Swordswoman, and then we ring the Wang Hu. It may be a bit greedy. Maybe I should have just set the Swordswoman and then Mirror Force the Wang Hu. That might have been better, especially because we do want to save the ring for like Scientist plays. The reason I do this is now they're at 4,800. They bring out a monster to clear the Swordswoman. First of all, we've got Mirror Force, so we can pop whatever they bring out and then attack him for another 1,500. But also we've got Change of Heart for later, so we can potentially Change of Heart whatever they bring out and then attack in as well with that. We've got Rhoda to get another monster to hand, so I feel ultimately pretty good about this. I feel like we've got the tempo to just kill our opponent here over the course of a couple turns. Now, they could definitely have things that disrupt this, which is a bit of a problem. But I think ultimately this is fine. They're going to bring out Next Head Kin, attack into our Swordswoman, and we're going to think about this, and we will ultimately pop that with the Mirror Force here. And we draw Raigeki, which is very nice for later. We're going to go for a Rhoda here. They do have Io, which is kind of rough. That does shut down our Change of Heart and our Raigeki, but it will cause them to take 700 damage each turn. So I feel pretty good about that. They will also have to take damage if they want to hit over the Swordswoman here. They're going to take another 700. They're going to set one and pass back to us. And I do a bit of an interesting play here, so I choose not to attack into the set because I have the read that it's probably something like Tomato or Witch or Sangan, and I don't want to turn that online for them. I also am very worried about if they just let the IO lapse next turn and then they go for a last will play attacking in to Swordswoman with like a tomato or a witch or something like that. And they could potentially go for a lethal line through the catapult OTK, which I don't want to happen. So what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to switch the Swordswoman to defense, set another. I figure if they commit another monster to board and then get super aggressive, we've got Lava Golem to, sort of clear their monsters and cause them to take 1,000 damage. And we've also got like MST, Change of Heart, etc. So if IO does ever drop, then we feel very good about that as well. So I feel like this is ultimately an okay play, although maybe I should have kept the Swordswoman in attack to prevent the play that it's coming up from occurring. But they do let the IO drop here, and they will set another monster. So we feel good about that because we've got the Lava Golem online. Unfortunately for us, they will just contact Fuse with the Z Metal Tank and the Y Dragon Head into a YZ Tank Dragon. Now, the effect here isn't really that relevant right now, so that's nice, but this would have been 600 damage if we had kept the Swordswoman in attack. Now, they could have definitely played around that, but it's summoning out Z Metal Tank, switching the Y Dragon Head to attack, and then just crashing in with 1 and then hitting in for 15 instead. So, ultimately it wouldn't have really changed much here. But I do think that it's good to keep that in mind for the future. They could have been potentially 600 down here. Although, as I mentioned, there are ways to play around it. We're just going to fire an MST in the end phase here because I feel like we can get pretty aggressive. If we do draw a monster, we just win the game right here. So I feel pretty good about that. Unfortunately, we don't draw a monster, but Dark Hole is a pretty good option. Now we're going to go for Change of Heart here, take the YT Tank Dragon and attack in to drop them down to 500, putting them at risk of dying to many, many things in our deck. And then we're going to set this Dark Hole pass back to our opponent. Now, what I want to happen here is I want them to commit another monster to board to try and get aggressive. If they do, we can Lava Golem to kill them next turn. And I feel like even if they summon out another monster here and deal a lot of damage, they won't quite be able to kill us here. So that's why I don't just dark hole the board and clear the YZ Tank Dragon. Maybe this is a little bit greedy. But I also feel like with the dark hole on board, we've got plans to clear their board anyways. If we draw one additional monster, we just win the game here. So I feel like this is ultimately pretty good. We also have not gone through many monsters in our deck, so I feel like we've got plenty of options for later to draw into and kill our opponent here. So they're going to tribute set over the YZ Tank Dragon and setting another card here. We're just going to dark hole that away. We know it's a catapult turtle, but I don't want them to pull off any catapult turtle shenanigans here, because I do think that there is a world where they just kill us next turn if they've got another monster. We're going to set an MST in the end, or in main phase 2 there, and pass back to our opponent. They're going to think about this a bit, bring out a cannon soldier, and that's a bit scary if they've got any form of sort of revival outside of like Call the Haunted Premat. Well, they can't use Premat, but if they got Called the Haunted, then we do have MST. So if they have Monster Reborn, we just lose the game here. But luckily, it doesn't seem like they do. They're just going to attack in for 1,400 and set 1, pass back to us. We draw Amazon Swordswoman, so we might as well just go for game here. We're going to bring that out. They didn't do anything here. We're going to fire MST, and we're going to pick the new back row, because I figure if they felt the need to commit another back row onto this board, it must be relatively important, and that's less likely to be a bluff than the first back row that they set. So we're going to go for that. That will clear it. We're going to fire a Regeki here to clear the Cannon Soldier and try and get in for game. Unfortunately, they do have Ring, so that will result in this game being a draw here, as opposed to a win on our part. If we kept the Amazon Swordswoman in attack, maybe things would have turned out differently, as they'd be 600 less. But, again, as I mentioned before, they did have the option to just crash their Z Metal Tank and Y Dragon Head into Amazon Swordswoman and attack directly. So maybe we would have just lost instead. It's hard to tell when, a major change like that might have happened. But that will be, I think, the first draw that we've captured in a video here. We have captured draws on stream, but I don't think in any of these sorts of gameplay videos. So very exciting to see. Very big milestone here. And very cool decks to have that happen with. But we're going to go into game 3 here. We do have a bit of a hole to crawl ourselves out of because we do need to win 2 games here. But I think it's definitely doable. I think the deck showed it was very strong in game 2 there, even though we didn't win. It was very, very close. And if we had just drawn a monster, we would have won. So, very interesting to see. So they're going to think about this a bit, set 2, pass back to us. I feel like this is a very good board here. We're going to go for pot. That does go through, so that means they probably don't have IO there. We're going to attack into their set with the Wang Hu here. Is a Witch, so they will get a search, unfortunately. They just search out a Jinza, which is kind of rough, but we do know about it now. We're going to go for Duo, pitching 2 from their hand. we're going to hit a turtle, and they're going to pitch a scientist. That's very worrying for us. I feel like scientist is a very good card, and this means that they might have access to the OTK online pretty quickly here. So when we activate our painful choice here, we are going to actually, keep the scientist OTK in mind and try and send things that either disrupt it further, like the hand rips, or potentially allow us to preserve our Wanghu. So we're also going to send Graceful because I feel like Graceful can draw us into more things that can help us here. But the last two we're going to send are the Io and a Call of the Haunted. Io shuts down their spells, so that shuts off the OTK that way. And Call of the Haunted, if they do have a way to clear the Wanghu here, we can bring that back. So that's why we picked what we did. They are going to give us the call here, and that's fine. I mean, as I said, this will preserve our Wanghu through a couple different things. They're going to go for a reasoning here, and they say chain after we call the level, but I mean, it's ultimately fine. Basically, you choose the level when reasoning is resolving. So if they do want to change something, they do it before we pick the level, but it's fine. On DB, these sorts of miscommunications can happen quite often. So now that they're destroying the Wanghu, I'll change the call to a 5. Because I am, again, very worried about the Scientist OTK. I feel like they might have another Scientist hand, given that they pitched a Scientist off the duo. So I'm a bit scared of that, and I'll call 5 instead here. Now, I think in hindsight, I could have just called 4, because that's the most likely option, and then just, use call on the summon that they brought out off of Reasoning to bring back Wanghu and shut off the Scientist from hitting the field. But, I think this isn't the worst call to make. It just does unfortunately end up being the wrong call for us here. So they do indeed hit a level 4, which is the most common outcome in their deck, I assume. So now they will be able to bring out Jinzo. So before they do that, we're going to actually call back the Wanghu here, because we won't get the option to do that later, and this does protect us from a bit more damage. They're going to tribute over the X head, fire a Last Will here, bring out a Y Dragon head, which, this will be a fair amount of damage, but it isn't quite the end of the game yet. They're going to attack into the Wanghu with the Jinzo. Unfortunately, in damage step, they do have a way to make this lethal, and that is limiter removal. So I think we were playing too much around the Scientist OTK and not as much around the Machine OTK. But we made the choice of what to play around there, and it didn't quite work out for us there. So we will indeed lose the game here. I think that we actually were in a pretty good position on the crackback, because we got Exiled Force plus Reborn for Wanghu plus Ceasefire. Like, we got a couple different things here. But, that is what happens in these games, and that's honestly one of the threatening things about this deck that Soul brought, where it combined the Scientist FTK with a more Machine OTK variant, is that there are just too many things to play around, and so you've got to really, go into a certain lane and play around that. But very, very scary deck, very, very cool deck. So if we lost, I'm glad it was to this sort of thing. And I'm curious to see if people will experiment with that sort of deck in the future. But on the topic of the Amazon's burn deck here, even though we weren't able to win here, we weren't actually able to win any of the games, although I think with game 2, we potentially could have. I think this deck is still really sick. It just does have some flaws in it. Like, I think game 2 shows how once the opponent knows what you're on, they can pretty easily play around Lava Golem. There are some monsters in this format that are just fine sitting on the field on its own, like Wanghu is definitely one of them. And if these monsters sit on the field and hit in, that can be pretty rough. And also, oftentimes when people do commit more than one monster board, they're going for like the Scientist OTK. And in that case, your opponent doesn't really care about committing more into a Lava Golem because you're just dead there anyways. So I think that is a bit of a flaw with the deck. Maybe in the future, people can try to add things like Secret Barrel or more chainable traps like that to sort of, give Scientists a bit tougher of a time. But that won't always work. So good things to consider for the future. I do still think this deck is pretty cool. I think that Amazon Swordswoman is a very, very cool card. And, combining it with the burn deck, makes it a natural fit. I think this probably is a better burn deck than the sort of wave motion cannon burn deck, or even like a more typical chain energy burn deck. So very, very cool to see. I hope that people experiment with this deck more. Again, shout outs to Colgate for actually making this deck list. Very, very cool stuff. And, very, very innovative. And I hope that people, if they're interested in innovating in this format further, they hop on over to the Discord server and, try out some cool ideas, because occasionally they can indeed work. But that's going to do it for this video. If you enjoy this sort of content, as always, please do subscribe. We're very, very close to 1,000. I'd really like to reach that by the end of November. So with your help, we can definitely do that. And also, if you enjoy this video, leave a like down below. Also, if you have any thoughts on the deck, definitely comment down below. I love talking with y'all as always and hearing your thoughts on these sorts of things. But until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.